you. That's the fun of it. That's why, as long as everybody's growing something, then I'm sure happy. But what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk about soils. We're going to go through a little slideshow. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints, but it seems like that's sort of a good avenue with this Zoom. I'm going to try not to bore you. I'm going to go pretty fast through some stuff because I want to point out some stuff that's important, I feel. And then hopefully at the end we'll ask questions and get you guys jazzed about things. So with that, I will start to share my screen, and if Sue will tell me when there is a presentation up. Did that come up?
Yes, and it looks great.
Okay. So why soil is important. We'll run through this for lots of reasons. These aren't the only ones, but for gardening, we're talking about the root system. And Sue, can you see my pointer? I just want to make sure everybody can see my pointer going back and forth a little bit.
Yes, I can see it.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Technology is pretty neat. So here's a plant growing in soil. Here's the root system. And this is what I would hope that all of our plant root systems can look like. You've got a lot going on here, a lot of living stuff that's causing these nodules along these roots, bacteria. It looks fluffy. The roots are well extended. All this white cloud that you see around here is actually fungus. And that fungi expand the root system, and they have an important role in the soil too. So we're going to talk about some of those things as we go forward. Just to get you started, we can start talking about these soil horizons, okay? And with the soil horizons, I like to think about them as just levels in the soil or levels in the soil profile. If you start down low, I mean, this could be granite, it could be limestone, it could be any kind of parent material down below. Our plants don't get any use out of that. Once you get up into a little higher in the soil profile, it's kind of the area that there's no oxygen that's being transferred. And so the roots don't go down into it much. You don't have hardly any organic material in it because of that lack of oxygen and stuff. So you don't have fungus or fungi and bacteria growing. And, that's kind of that this might be what I call dirt. If we're going to say, is it soil? Is it dirt? This would be what I say is dirt. Although my kids play in dirt, I always say I like to play in the soil. And so for this presentation, we're going to kind of be focusing on that rooting area of the soil, which is going to be topsoil. And this is where all the life is happening and all the healthiness can be measured. Okay, there's three kind of categories I'm going to talk to you guys about tonight. One is going to be biology. So everybody get ready because we're going back to high school. We're going to talk about biology. We're going to talk mainly about biology because that's the sexy kind of fun topic. Then we're going to talk about chemistry, and we're going to talk about physics because they all are important when we think about soil health. The one that we kind of get caught up the most in and that we have the most fun with is this SOM, which is what I call sexy ongoing maintenance, okay? It actually stands for soil organic matter, but this is where all the fun in gardening, I think, happens, especially with our organic gardeners. The soil organic matter, this is the organic piece of your soil. We like to say that a healthy soil has at least 5% organic matter. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but you need something. I mean, if you think about the farms out in the Midwest that are constantly plowed, they don't have very much organic matter in them. They only have maybe 1, maybe 2% organic matter. And then once we get up into some Gunnison soils that really have a lot of health and life to them, we start approaching that 5. I've even had soil samples come in. I think it gets a little excessive once we get around that 10% organic matter. Then that might be a little too much. But But what is soil organic matter? It's kind of this piece that's composed of both living and dead things. It's only about 15% living. That includes all these wonderful things. You've all seen this soil food web picture. I would give credit to somebody, but I have no idea, it's been shared so much, where it came from. But it just shows you all the different life forms that are affecting the soil. And this represents about 15% of our organic matter. Then we get into about 15% of the organic matter is just dead organisms and dead carcasses and dead roots and different things that haven't been broken down yet. And if we start to break those dead things down, we get this nice humus that you can think of as being about 70% of that organic matter is actually just very dead, very stable. This is what you think about as your stable carbon source in the soil. So when we talk about the animals and those organisms and those living things, we've got beneficial ones. We've got probably the majority of all the different things in the soil that are living are just neutral, not really having a positive effect on anything or a negative effect, but they're just all living there happily in their own environment. And then we get into some harmful things. I mean, this is obviously like your earwigs, and we do have some things like E. coli that are harmful. But today I'm going to kind of talk about the beneficial ones that we all like to talk about, because to have a healthy soil, you've got to have healthy, beneficial organic material. One of the bacteria that's really helpful to our legume species, so this is like your peas and your clovers and your vetches and your beans, are these rhizobacteria. The rhizobacteria are really cool because they have the ability to actually take atmospheric nitrogen that's kind of coming through as in the air and into the soil. And those bacteria can actually grab that nitrogen gas and actually put it in a nitrogen form that the plants can take up. That's why we don't need a lot of nitrogen in our soils if we are producing a lot of our legumes or peas and stuff. It's hard to raise beans in Gunnison, but the peas, if you pull a healthy pea plant out, you're going to see all these little nodules around the roots. These nodules are what are those rhizobia bacteria, and they're pulling nitrogen from the atmosphere and putting it into the plant, because nitrogen is a huge mineral that we need our plants to uptake for proper growth. The cool thing about it is that those bacteria wouldn't be healthy without the plant being healthy. And when you have a root, the root actually provides a ton of sugars to these bacteria. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and it's kind of a cool thing. There's also a lot of other bacteria in the soils that help out the roots. They actually can mine around the roots some different minerals and pump those into the roots. And so I don't want you to get focused that it's just rhizobia bacteria, but because there's a lot of helpful bacteria as well. The other big one is the fungi. The fungi, primarily their goal is to extend the root system, and they can extend it up to 1,000 times, just depending on how much good fungi are going on around the root system. This mycorrhizae, it's from the fungi, but that is a word we use for what these threads are. If you can see in this photograph, all these little threads are the fungi that are attaching to a root system and expanding its capability to reach out and mine all sorts of minerals from the soil. So healthy roots really do better with this mycorrhizae. It also helps the plants to take up water, and we'll get into some more benefits. One of the benefits, one of the biggest benefits even, not that the plants are not just getting more healthy, but at the same time, the fungi will help build the soils. And so they do that in a way that they kind of put out this glue. And this glue helps to build particles or put particles together into little aggregates, or what we call PEDs, which are sort of like soil clods, I guess. And when we have kind of our soil bound in these little aggregates, then that opens up a lot more space for water and air to go through. It makes your roots a lot easier to go through the soil. And so that's kind of a cool thing that fungi do too. So when we're talking about the organic matter, how are we going to add it? One way is compost. I think it can make up a huge piece of your soil if you can get some good compost. Thing about compost is it's a great carbon source and a source of nutrients for the different life forms in the soil. It's usually a little bit higher in phosphorus and potassium. Here in Gunnison, we don't really worry about potassium because we have a ton of potassium in the soil, but phosphorus sometimes can be limiting a little bit in some of our soils and our native soils. So adding compost to those is really helpful. One thing about compost is that the nitrogen that's in it is really slow to release, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. For one, it's kind of a stable source of, or sustainable source of always having some nitrogen available that can be released, especially as the bacteria and life forms start eating on it. But at the same time, the bad thing is that if you're just adding compost as sort of what you think is a fertilizer or adding nutrients to your plants, it doesn't have a lot of nitrogen in it. And so, but it's a great carbon source and a great source of organic material. Now, the other one we all like to talk about is manures. And I always get the questions, which is the best manure? Is it, llama poop? Is it steer poop? Is it, maybe it's yak poop? I really don't know. But there are some things with manure that you need to know. For one, it breaks down and it composts and it makes a great soil amendment. It is higher in nitrogen. But at the same time, it came out of an animal and it could have some bacteria in it that are unhealthy or pathogenic bacteria like E. coli, because all of our animals do have E. coli in their system that can be harmful to people. And then it's important to till manure in if you are going to put it in, because the nitrogen sources that are in manure actually get volatilized or escape into the atmosphere quite a bit quicker than some of our other nitrogen sources. And so it's nice to get that worked in if you are going to add manure. On the pathogen side, I say wait at least 4 months. Really in Gunnison, you should be waiting 6 to 8 months because we don't have that much time for the soil or the, I guess, biological activity of the soil to help break down some of the E. coli's and pathogens. And so if you're going to add manure to your garden, you can't do it this year. If you need to do that in the fall, and you need to work it on into your soil. It can also have weed seeds. Another thing with manures is it could have herbicides. If you're growing organically, that can be tough. You really need to know your manure sources. I put this slide up there just because I think it's kind of fun. And it just shows you, let me move some things around here, but it just shows you there's lots of different types of manure. They all have sort of a low nitrogen percentage when you compare it to other nitrogen sources. But this is kind of the breakdown of the 3, primary nutrients that plants need. And they're all pretty low percentages. But again, like I said, when you add manure, it, like compost, the nitrogen's only available like half the first year and then half of that the next year. So it becomes kind of this sustainable way to feed the organisms in the soil and the plants to benefit. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but there are differences and people have measured, but I can tell you that none of these numbers are really concrete. because it all depends on the animal's diet and how much nitrogen and protein they're taking into their diet, as far as how much nitrogen is in the soil or is in their manure. So if we can't really add nitrogen and minerals through compost and manures as far as the plant would like, how do we get those in? So if we start to see deficiencies in plants, sometimes our ideas go to fertilizers. And fertilizer is not a bad word because you can have inorganic fertilizers and you can have organic fertilizers, right? On the inorganic side, this will be your chemical ones, there's your synthetic ones. There's a lot of different ways to make these fertilizers. They usually are very specific and they only contain a few minerals, but they can have minerals in high amounts. And so if you really just want to pump nitrogen onto your garden, you know, fertilizers are an easy way to do that. And if you need a lot of nitrogen, I try to steer people more to, you know, fertilizing their yards and their perennial plants with inorganic fertilizers. But with that, all of the labels on fertilizers all have labels, and you kind of need to know the percentages of the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the potassium. Sometimes they add sulfur, but sometimes that's needed or not needed. I can tell you in Gunnison, about the only limiting nutrient that we have in our soils is nitrogen. So that really is kind of the only thing you can think that you'll be needing or need to add. But these inorganic forms are actually readily available to plants, and they're quick releases. And so boom, the plant can get nitrogen really easy. But one thing about that is that it also goes away really fast. So you don't have that sustainable, long-lasting nitrogen source from them. Over to the organic fertilizers, there are tons every year, more and more organic fertilizers coming on the market. The nutrients aren't as high as the synthetic fertilizers, but in amounts, they're still pretty low, but we can get a lot of quick acting nitrogen coming from the organic fertilizers. One thing with most of the organics though, is that you kind of have to have them converted into an inorganic form, or the nutrients that are in them converted into an inorganic form by the soil, by bacteria and fungi before the plants can use them. Which if you have a healthy living soil, that happens really easily. They're a little slower released, and especially in Gunnison, where the soil is cold, you just don't have a whole lot of microbial activity, you know, at different times of the year. Really and truly, you need that soil to be 50 to even 70 degrees for a lot of those microbes to be active and functioning properly. So, so you kind of keep that in mind if you're going to add organic fertilizers. These can be blood meal. I put this in here. They can be blood meal, fish emulsion, although you got to be careful because that can get pretty stinky sometimes. Urea. Urea is one that is really high in nitrogen. That's what these numbers are. This is nitrogen levels and phosphorus levels and potassium levels. But that first number is nitrogen. And you can see here on fish emulsion and urea that urea is really high in nitrogen. 46% is nitrogen. But it also releases really quickly, and it also volatilizes pretty quickly as well. So if you're going to put urea on, or even fish emulsion, you need to probably be tilling it into the soil and not just putting it on the top. Then we have all sorts of things like nitrogen boosters. Well, that's kind of what I just covered in the top, but then there's also phosphorus boosters, which I'm just going to say we don't really need in Gunnison. Potassium boosters really aren't needed all that much either, especially if we have a healthy living soil. So one thing I did want to cover is legumes, and these are those like I said before, these are those ones that love to have the rhizobia bacteria beside them, making the nodules and fixing the nitrogen. Here in Gunnison, if you look out across our hay fields, we'll see a lot of hairy vetch, we'll see a lot of red clover, we'll see a lot of white clover in these fields, and that's why a lot of these ranchers don't fertilize anything in their fields, because they actually have clovers and vetches that can really do beneficial things to the soil and provide a ton of nitrogen for the other grasses. And so having a mixture and diversity of grass and legume species in your hay meadows actually is really beneficial. And that's where we get into our cover crops. If you till these things into the soil, or you grow these things kind of on an off year, you can add a lot of nitrogen back into your soil that might not have been there, or that you may have taken out from growing one of your nitrogen kind of hog type crops. Potatoes, if you're growing potatoes, you're going to find out real quick that you're going to have a great crop the first year you plant potatoes. The second crop, or the second year, if you don't do anything to your soil, it's not going to be so good. You're not going to have, because they love nitrogen. Okay, so to recoup, that was your biology lesson. There's a lot of activity, a lot of living things going on, extending this root system, protecting the root system, and benefiting the soil structure. Remember, I talked about the fungi making those aggregates and those PEDs. And then sure enough, I put in here, don't forget about the earthworms, Eric. Earthworms are kind of cool because they go around and they mine this soil compost, or this soil organic matter. And then their castings and poop is really beneficial to other microorganisms. But one of the biggest things that earthworms do is they create these tunnels. They allow the soil to really deep percolate a lot of that water, and they're just beneficial to have into your soil. So if you see earthworms in your soil, or any worms growing, that's a good thing. That means sort of that whole biological system is working properly. Okay, let's see where we're at. Chemistry. I think I'm doing good on time. So let's talk a little bit about chemistry. We talked about biology. I don't know how many people were fans of chemistry in high school, but I'm just going to talk about a couple of things. This is a real busy slide, so don't get too hung up in it. But the major nutrients, or most of the essential nutrients that plants need, all are what we call cations, or they have this positive electrical charge to them. The root hairs, like this is a root hair, it's going to be kind of a negatively charged structure. And all around it, it could be hydrogen, which is what this H is. Hydrogen's positive, so it can attach to the root hairs. But maybe instead of hydrogen, we got to have that inorganic kind of mineral like calcium or magnesium, or any of the minerals. They can come over and attach in place of these hydrogens. And that's how the roots kind of uptake a lot of these minerals. And it all kind of happens in this soil solution around the root hairs. Now, if you look over here, these are the big nutrients that the plants need for life. Nitrogen is the biggest one for growth. Phosphorus, potassium, those are what we call our primary nutrients. That's why when you go to the store and you buy fertilizer bags, they primarily have 3 nutrients available, because those are the ones that are the most limiting of the plants. When we get into the secondary chemicals, they're needed a little bit less. And then the tertiary minerals are those real micro minerals that the plant needs to have life, but doesn't need a whole lot of. And you may not have a lot of these in the soil. This is where the fungi can become real important, because they can stretch that root system out and really go find these micronutrients for those roots. We're going to talk a little bit later about clay. but particles are just little pieces of soil that these positive minerals can attach to. This humus up here, this is that soil organic, that very broken down soil organic matter. We can get a lot of our minerals attaching to that as well. So you have all these minerals to mine over here by this root, but it happens through this soil solution. And that's where the chemistry starts to come into effect. We talk big about pH, and the pH of your soil is really, really important. We talk about, and this is kind of how minerals can go back and forth towards that root system. If you have a pH of 7, I don't know if you remember talking about pH in chemistry in high school, but 7 is what we call neutral. In this green box here, this is the area that plants really do the best in, because these essential minerals can be uptaken by the plants well in this pH solution, or this soil solution with a neutral-ish pH. Once you start getting into some of our Gunnison soils, so I see this is kind of, I've tested a lot of soils over the last 15 years, and you know, we do have some neutral soils in Gunnison, but then we also start branching up into the 8.5 range on some of our pH of our soils in Gunnison. And so at that point, if you say you have a soil at 8.5, well, now all of a sudden copper and zinc may start to not be absorbed by the plants very well. Maybe you get into some boron issues, although that's a really hard one to diagnose or even test for. You may even start to have some calcium issues. So if you have a high pH soil and you're trying to grow tomatoes in it, you know, you might have some calcium deficiency in your tomatoes, and that can cause some issues. And then also even nitrogen. You might not be able to absorb nitrogen into your roots very well with a high pH soil. So this is a great slide and a huge one to kind of mentally get your head around. If you're in the neutral zone, your plants are able to take up minerals a lot better than if you're on the high end of the pH side, which we call these higher end pHs basic. And then if you get to the lower pHs, like down around 5, then that's really considered acidic. And while blueberries do good in an acidic soil, most other plants won't. The other thing to know about pH, just real quick, is that it's sort of logarithmic. And so as you go up in pH, it gets stronger and stronger. And it gets harder and harder to change your soils to lower the pH. So if you say, okay, I've got a pH of 8, how do I get it to a pH of 6.5? Well, it won't happen. Just because it's so hard, you probably end up having a lot of calcium carbonate or lime in the soil once you get up into these higher pHs, and it's just really hard to ever reduce it. If you don't have lime in your soil or you don't have calcium carbonate, there's a chance you could add sulfur, and sulfur can kind of bring down that pH a little bit, but only a little bit. And the way it does that is you put sulfur in the ground and the microbes produce sulfuric acid, basically. And so that acid sort of helps bring down the pH a little bit. But the big thing is pH is one of those things that you can't change in your soil, and just kind of know that. If you have an acidic soil, I'll just to go back, if you have an acidic soil, it's a lot easier to bring it up than it is having a basic soil like most of us have and bring it down. Okay, so we did biology, chemistry, real quick, physics. This is really important. And physics is actually the structure of your soil. There's a lot of key concepts in this. Here's 3 different types of soil. The one with the shovel is sand. So you just think about sand like the beach. If you think about this middle soil, it has a little more structure to it. That's going to be your loamy soils. And then over here on the right, this is what you'll see more in Steamboat and down in Durango. You'll get into some of these clayey soils that actually crack. Now I've seen some of these clay soils down in the South where you can have like a 12-inch crack going through them just because they're so tightly bound. Clay soils are great, but they're also really hard to deal with. And so most of our soils in Gunnison, you'll be happy to know we have a little bit of clay, but most of them fit this loamy and sandy profile. So they're easy to grow potatoes in, they're easy to grow carrots in, and they have a lot of good functions to them. The one thing that they're lacking is tons and tons of nutrient holding capacity. And so we'll talk about kind of how these different soils function. Wow, that's a big slide. I didn't know it was going to be that big and yellow. But with the physics, with these particle sizes, all of our soils we kind of classify as either sandy or loamy or clay. And these are the particle sizes. So clay, the reason it's so tightly bound and we can make plates out of it and mugs and all these clay pots is because it's a really, really, really fine textured particle versus something like beach sand, which would be as big as this big yellow circle. We have some smaller sands that are probably more typical of what we see around Gunnison, but then in Gunnison we have a lot of this loam soil, and that's a good thing because we have draining soils, and they're not as hard to work as clay soils. I'll try to go through this pretty quick. So on the clay side, because they're such fine particles, matter of fact, if you shake them up, if you shake dirt up in a jar, that layer that never clears out, that's always brown, that's going to be your clay. It doesn't settle out, very well. Sand settles out really fast if you put it into a solution. But because clay is so fine and such a small particle, this triangle becomes a huge, cool thing or knowledge base. If you get up to 20% clay in your soil, if you look here at the percent clay, as soon as you get up to 20% clay, all of these types of soil act like a clay. That means they're going to be tightly bound. They're going to seal over. They're not going to transfer oxygen really well. They're going to be real easy to compact. And so clay is really a tough, workable type of a soil. On the other side, you have sandy soil, and you have these silty and loamy soils. And silt and loam, they're not the same, but for the most part, they're kind of the same size of particles. As you go up in sand, this triangle, you can figure out what's your percent sand in your soil, what's the percent silt or loam in your soil, and what's the percent clay. And then from this chart, you can decide exactly what kind of soil you have. I put this microgram graph in about, or picture in about the size of these clay particles. If we go back, sorry about that if that hurt your eyes, but the clay particle is real small, but it's also not a nice little circle. Clay likes to stack together. This is what makes it so compactable, I guess, but it's in these little tiny platelets. And that's why the nutrient holding capacity is huge in clay soils. So these clay soils can hold a lot of those minerals around them a lot better than sand can. So that's a positive that clay has going for it, is that ability to really hold those nutrients around it. If we think about them, a clay soil versus a sandy soil, The water holding capacity is really big in clay because the water can stay in clay a lot better because the particles are so little. The sand, if you think about putting water on a beach, the sand, it doesn't have much water holding capacity to it. And so you get these fast draining soils. A positive about sand is that it's quickly warms up in the springtime versus if you have a wet clay soil, it's really slow to warm up. And in Gunnison, we sometimes need as much warming in our soils as quick as we can get it. Workability, this crusting and packing, obviously clay is high and sand is low. And I put these big water droplets here just to show you that the water of clay kind of spreads out and goes slow. And in sandy soil, it's fast draining and goes down pretty quickly. Here's that water of a clay soil going into a clay soil versus a sandy soil. This really is important when we start thinking about how we're going to water our Gunnison soils and how we're going to irrigate them. If you're irrigating by tubes and you're in a sandy soil, you might need those outlets where the water comes out of the pores of the pipes. You need those spacings to be a little bit closer in sandy soils than you would in clay soils. You can get by with some farther spaces to your irrigation pipe with clay soils. You can see how fast draining these sandy soils are. This is 15 minutes and 40 minutes. The water you put on now, 40 minutes later, will already be a foot below the sand soil. These type soils get really hard when we're germinating seeds. When we get into the clay soils, sometimes you can have just too much water pooling or sitting at the top, or it doesn't drain very well. And so that can be a positive because it holds the water, especially if we're trying to germinate seeds, but it also can kind of be a negative too. But also people that are watering their yard, just as a side note, you have to put a lot more water on at different times when you have a sandy soil versus a clay soil. A lot of times we get recommendations of, you should water deep and less often. Well, on Gunnison soils, people need to water less and more often because we want that water to be in the rooting zone of plants. Okay, so let's go back. Soil organic matter improves any type of soil texture. So soil organic matter, that sexy ongoing maintenance, right? It's the gold that you need. If you have a sandy soil, you need to add soil organic matter to it. If you have a clay soil, you can add some soil organic matter to it, and they'll both be better off. It forms PEDs. It takes a clay. If you have clay and add a lot of soil organic matter to it, you'll have a beautiful, rich soil like this. You can't just add clay to sand. It doesn't work that way. And you can't just add sand to clay and get the best type soils. So just know that you can't add a soil to a soil and change it. You really need to be adding soil organic matter to it to bring stuff in. Okay, so Eric's blend. If you've listened to all that, you're really stumped and you're starting a new garden, here's kind of the foolproof thing. Topsoil. We want that good native topsoil, and you need to know where it came from. And you need to know what it's made up of. What is the majority of that texture of that soil? Is it sand? Is it loam? Is it sandy loam? Does it have a clay in it, and how much clay is in it? But 50% of your garden should just be good quality topsoil. You're going to pull in a lot of nutrients and stuff in good topsoil. Then you're going to add some fluff to it. You're going to add a lot of kind of compost and carbon material to it that's been broken down. And this is really going to help your soil out and allow the nutrient or the biological activity to have fun in that soil. Oh, and then we get to 20%, just fun stuff. And people tell me all the time, what should I add? Should I milk out my, worm bin and put make some worm compost tea. Should I put that in? And I say, sure, you bet. That sounds fun. Mushroom compost. I'm a big fan of mushroom compost. This is the dirt after mushrooms have grown in it. So you have a lot of cool stuff going on in mushroom compost. But it also could be, you could put shredded leaves on it. You know, you could take your coffee grounds and, you know, what other kind of compost teas you come up with, you could add those in there too. But I say on the fun stuff, try not to go over 20%, but make it fun. These are the things that are going to make your vegetables taste better, or for sure you're going to feel that they taste better. And it's also, you can't hurt anything if you're not going over that 20%. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to have one thing I want to do with you guys, if you'll bear with me. There's a tremendously great resource that I want to share with you. And if I can find it here. And if you can see my screen.
We can see that, Eric.
Can you see the web soil survey?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, web soil survey. This is a very, very underutilized product. Just Google web soil survey. First thing that pops up, you click, you find the big green dot, you click on that. This won't take, oh. Let's see if we can get there. And then it comes up with this big government type program that's sort of hard to get around in, but let me just show you what you can do. You know, one thing I wanted to look at, I can draw little areas and zoom in on them. Here's Gunnison. I'm gonna go down. We're gonna start looking into the Crested Butte area. And I wanted to come here to Crested Butte South. Oh, look here. I can draw
Eric,
little. What's
Eric,
that?
we can't see the screen that you're on right now.
Okay, it'll catch up. There's a little bit of a lag. I'm going down onto the ice farm up there in CB South. Can you see that, or did it not pop up yet?
We're not seeing it yet.
Oh,
Seeing the Google page.
okay, well, I can back up. Maybe it won't do it that fast with this big of a zoom and this many people on it. But it could go really quick. But this web soil survey, what it allows you to do is really zone down or focus in on an area, create an area of interest. It could be your backyard. It could be Cold Harbor. It could be Sue's gardens at her house. And from that, you can really quickly tell what kind of soil the native soils are. And so I'm gonna ask you, Sue, did it come up finally? Do you see?
No, we are
Okay.
still only seeing your Google screen.
Oh, that's no fun. Okay, we will drop out then. And that's all I have. So I'm open for questions. I went over a lot of stuff really quick, but I would encourage all of you to Google web soil survey and then just play with it. And it has instructions on it that you can really do some good things that way. So with that.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, we have about 5 minutes for questions, and 3 questions came in on the chat.
Oh, okay. I see
So,
29, so I'm glad there's only 3.
Yeah. Well, there were other ones, but we kind of dealt with what fava beans taste like and other fun. We had a fun chat while you were presenting amazing slides. So one of the questions that Rachel asked was, can you please talk about how to cycle cover clover and cover crops here in Gunnison? Are we talking a season of clover and then wait a year and then a season of veggies? Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, on the cover crops, that's a hard one in Gunnison, right? Because our growing season is so short and you want to be growing vegetables or food during that time period. You know, you can start after you harvest. You can try to get some things to germinate. You can try to get some of the, maybe an annual. You're not going to have much success actually with these clovers and legumes. You might could plant some peas, but that's going to be pretty expensive. You can do some annual grasses and then plow those annual grasses in. Some of the annual grasses would be like wheat or oats or something like that. And you'll at least get that green material down into the soil. But honestly, in Gunnison, it's going to be tough. And I don't know, Sue, you may have tried some different cover crops and had good luck with some. But for most people, it's pretty tough unless you take the garden out or that area out for a whole year and just plant something the next year in it.
That's been my experience as well. Just the growing season is too short. So it's almost like you have to go fallow and do a cover crop 1 year and back to that. Another question came in. The question was, can you have too much, well, should I say soil organic material or sexy ongoing maintenance? Okay, the question is, can you have too much?
I think you can. I see in, you think about potting soil, it's probably pretty much all that SOM. But I think once you get over 10%, you're starting to not have that really healthy mineral component to your soil. And so, yeah, I would say once you get over 10%, but you'd be okay, probably up to 15%, to be honest, and be fine.
Okay. Another question Carla asked, is peat moss a good filler for compost?
Peat moss, no. To answer your question, it's not but it can be fine. It adds some tilth to your soil. But peat moss is not really a great source of anything unless it's been broken down. It has a little more acidic feel to it, but it really doesn't affect the soil pH. So if I was to just say, should I add peat moss to my soil? I'd say no. You can pick better organic materials than that here.
Are there any other questions? We have about a minute left of Eric's valuable time. Please enter him into the chat or turn on your microphone if you have some last questions for Eric.
Real quick, back to the peat moss, Sue, though.
Oh.
Have fun with it. If you want to add it. You're not going to hurt anything with it. I'll just say that. That's that fun piece. You can add whatever you want to in there.
Well, my peat moss story, I think most people know peat moss is fairly low pH and Gunnison soils are relatively high pH. If you want to grow blueberries in Gunnison, you bury a bale of peat moss and plant your blueberries directly in it. I like to consider myself a reasonably good grower, but 10, 12 years ago, I planted 8 blueberries in bales of peat moss, and only 3 have survived to this day. And I've gotten maybe half a cup of blueberries. So just pay attention to Eric's slide about pH and go with what we have and not with what you want.
Well, good. I stayed on time. I'm sorry that website didn't work. It was a little adventurous, I know, trying to share some stuff, but
there was one more question, Eric, if you're willing. Kimberly is asking, can we discuss coffee grounds for altering pH?
Yeah. It's sort of that, deal with coffee grounds. And I hate to be that way. If you have a high pH, it depends on how high your pH is. The coffee grounds can add, like peat moss, a little bit of an acidic type of a organic material, but it's not going to affect the pH of your soil and that overall soil solution. Coffee grounds are great though, because they add a lot of organic matter, and you might as well do something with them. They're not going to hurt your soil. There's a lot of bugs that are going to poop out good stuff from coffee grounds. So yeah, have fun with those. That's that fun piece, right? Again, probably. But the pH is hard, guys. If you have a, and I would make the plug that you don't know your pH unless you have the soil tested. You can't go to the hardware store and get some of those little tablets and shake it up in water and really get a good idea of what your soil pH is. You really need to bring that into me. I do soil test after soil test all throughout the season. It costs $25, and that's not to me, but that's to the lab that we send the sample off to. And then you can diagnose your pH, what minerals you're lacking in your soil. You can quantify that cation exchange capacity. You can learn a lot about your soil by just getting it tested. And so that's my biggest point for everybody to take home. So if you don't know what you're growing in, how do you know what to add to it?
Wonderful, Eric. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation. And just a reminder to everyone, it will be posted on YouTube. I think we'd all like to see some of those great slides again. So thanks for your time. And we're gonna, unless you have any closing remarks, we'll move over to the Locavore Round Table.
No, thank you guys for letting me start your conference off. And I hope that you have a good discussion and for all the rest of the 2 days too. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so we're just a few minutes late for the Locavore Roundtable, and I don't know if we have additional people logging in for this session, but I basically, well, let's just get started. I'm Susan Wyman with the Gunnison Valley Producers Guild and Gunnison Gardens. I just want to welcome everyone to the Locavore Roundtable, where we're going to brainstorm and share some of our visions for a vibrant local food system. So in this 1 hour session, we're going to start with existing organizations in the Gunnison Valley, and they're going to take 3 to 5 minutes and describe what each of them are doing. We'll hear from the Gunnison Food Pantry and Mountain Roots Food Project, the Gunnison Valley Producers Guild, and the Center for Cold Climate Security. And after that 3 to 5 minute, just brief introduction about what these organizations are doing to build a local resilient food system. Then Paul Planer is going to briefly discuss his vision for a locavore movement. And we'll open up the session for ideas and questions and discussion and just brainstorming. So you can enter your ideas into the chat box at any time, and we will read as many of those as possible. And you'll also have an opportunity, if you'd like, to turn on your video and turn on your microphone and have a discussion and talk out loud. That's, I think, how we're going to do this roundtable. So, and I'll just say one thing, as we're kind of putting together our vision and our ideas and our brainstorming for local food, it occurred to me that we all need to be kind of like JFK, who says, ask not, well, we're going to paraphrase, right? We're going to ask not what local food can do for you, but think about what you can do for local food. So we're all in this together, and this is a brainstorming roundtable. And I'm seeing farmers, and I'm seeing a lot of backyard gardeners and restaurant folks, and this is just going to be a great roundtable. So with that, is Katie Dix here. Katie is the executive director of the Gunnison Country Food Pantry. And Katie, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk to us 3 to 5 minutes about, local food and food security and what the food pantry is doing.
Thank you. I'm very excited to say that maybe we can play in this arena. The Gunnison Country Food Pantry is fed 1,400 families last year. Many of them came to us because they were truly hungry, and many came to us because they were scared of COVID. But either way, everybody that walked up to the door got a bundle of food. They can come once a week, and we're still giving out those bundles and serving everyone who asks. But because we received the Colorado Food Assistance Grant or funding, we have a little more money than sometimes we have, and we can be slightly more generous with buying food from local producers, then sometimes we have to. Many times we have to get it as much as we can, as least expensive as we can. And we have already made connections with egg growers, and we are looking for other opportunities where we can buy locally and give that out in our food bundles.
Thank you, Katie. That was a wonderful introduction, and how the food pantry is working with local food and just the valuable service that you guys provide. Next, we're going to turn it over to Holly Kahn. Holly is the director of the Mountain Roots Food Project. Just like Katie, I'm sure it would be difficult to summarize everything that you're doing in 5 minutes. But Holly, do you want to take over and talk about what the Mountain Roots Food Project is doing with local food and food security?
Sure, I'll try. I think I might have misunderstood the opening remarks. So I also have some things on the vision for the future of local food, or maybe that comes up in the Locavore movement. To try to just touch on our current efforts. We've been working in the local food arena for 10 years. And we're trying to boost both production and consumption, boost supply and demand, connect all consumers and all producers, increase the number of producers, increase the number of consumers in so many different ways, starting with little kids with education in the school, community education, restaurants, seasonal eating, sort of every area of the local food arena. Specifically with food security, if this is supposed to be focused on food security, I would say that everything that we do through an equity lens. And when we feel like the local food system is one of our country's, one of our nation's, one of our world's best hopes for correcting the damages that have been done by the global industrialized food system that has emerged since World War II. And we want to encourage people to take their power back. And I believe, and people who join Mountain Roots believe, that we can do that by localizing our food system, getting more people involved in producing, and so many things. Sorry, I'm kind of going into the vision. What we're doing now, we run the food farm to school program for the school district. We push into classrooms. We help with cafeteria school meal reform, and we offer summer programming and after school programming for children so that they develop a sense from an early age of how their food choices affect the health of their bodies, the health of the economy, the health of the community, and the health of the environment. To boost food production at the community scale and at the individual scale, we are growing ourselves into community farm spaces at a production scale, and at the same time training the next generation of farmers so that young agrarians can learn the skills they need, and hopefully go on to be a ripple effect, not only in our community, but to take what they're doing out into the big wide world and take their farming skills to other places. At the community scale, we're supporting a network of home gardeners, and we also run a few community gardens so that people, again, can take power into their own hands and be more self-sufficient. I feel like that is one of the most powerful ways we can break down at least the cost barrier that many people say exists just to access healthy food, let alone local food. Local food, healthy food can be free if you grow it yourself. And so then in our food security arm, again, I was saying we work through an equity lens, and we try to do food rescue and food donation program called Backyard Harvest that connects neighbors to neighbors, and also addresses the food waste issue that is so prevalent in our world today. We realize that people who are on low incomes and often struggling with poverty are making choices between whether to pay their heating bills or their rent bills or to buy clothes or to put food on the table. And we want to try to break down not only the cost barriers, but the education barriers that exist for people who often struggle with food insecurity, are often also undereducated, unfortunately, about health and nutrition. So we try to raise up the level of education to help build the why people should care about local food. And we do that through Cooking Matters classes, which are free, 6-week courses offered to free to low income people. They learn how to cook healthy meals on a budget of $10 or less for a family of 4, also how to shop smarter. And they get a bag of groceries to take home after their classes so that they can repeat the lessons that they've learned, and they also get food through that. We are working to develop a produce prescription program where our healthcare providers start to take a proactive approach to the care and feeding of our community by literally prescribing people who have either food insecurity issues or health concerns to eat more fruits and vegetables, and to provide incentives like vouchers for them to purchase from local farms and other local outlets for food. We are also working in the food economy arena because we know that charitable efforts are amazing, but in order for this all to be sustainable, the farmer needs to get the lion's share of the food dollar. And we know that that isn't really what's happening with the industrial food system that we have now. So our work there involves supporting the development and growth and scaling up of all food related businesses, from the producers like Gunnison Gardens, Iola Farms, Polio Brossler's hot sauce, Ellen's pickles, whoever is in the food arena, we want to support them and help them scale up and grow their businesses in a way that's not just sustainable, but profitable and thriving. And we know that we have to boost supply and demand at the same time. So boosting demand is a little bit about education. It's a lot about aggregation, processing, distribution, and connection. So we're trying to make those connections here within the valley, and also to connect our valley to the food hubs in our region so that we can get more food moving around the region, and that Gunnison can show up as a both giver and receiver in the local food distribution circuit. And then finally, our 5th focus area of work is food policy, and it's an area for future growth. We don't actively pursue policy issues, but if we run up against them, we will address them. And I guess that's it in a nutshell. I'll hand it over to the next person.
Sue, you're muted.
It was difficult to summarize in 5 minutes. You are doing so much in the Valley. And next, this is Susan Wyman. I'm going to talk briefly about what the Gunnison Valley Producers Guild is doing. And then Dannah will talk about the Center for Cold Climate Food Security. And then Paul will talk next. So just really briefly, I know a lot of folks hadn't heard much about the Gunnison Valley Producers Guild. We're a 501c6 organization, and we've been in existence for about 3 years now. And we're a group of what we call producers and co-producers. So we're farmers and ranchers. And then the co-producers are gardeners, chefs, cooks, anyone who eats, anyone who's interested in local food. One of the main things we do is we hold a plant sale, 2 plant sales every spring. We'll have one in April and one in May, to support backyard gardeners, and so that local gardeners can grow the plants that we grow as producers, farms and ranches. We have put on this conference. That's a big event for us. And also the Producers Guild has a spring CSA, and we've had a fall CSA to push the growing season beyond what you're going to get at the farmers markets and so on. And in the pre-COVID years, we used to have farm to table for the people dinners, which were great because There's a lot of really high dollar, high zoot farm to table dinners, but we wanted to set them up where we could all share food, rent the space, and feed our families for $10, $10 admission. So those are things that the Guild is doing. We're certainly not as robust as Mountain Roots. We're not as big and impressive, but we're a little group that's doing a lot, I think, for local food. And now you know about us through our free Wix website, right? You know where to find us. That's how you register. All right. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dannah Lehman with the Western Colorado University's Center for Cold Climate Food Security.
Hi, folks. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Good. My name's Dannah. As Sue introduced me so well, I'm a graduate student at Western, but I'm also the AmeriCorps Vista for the Center for Cold Climate Food Security. So we are not a nonprofit, but we are an organization underneath Western's umbrella. And we exist, it's a relatively new organization established in 2018 by Dr. Kate Clark, if most of you know her. And we exist to amplify experiential opportunities for students in the Gunnison Food Shed. And that's just a fancy way of saying we exist to connect Western students to opportunities to help better the food shed in Gunnison and surrounding areas. So being a relatively new organization run by just one professor on campus, there hasn't been a lot of visibility for us or huge projects, but a few things we've been working on this year and with some master students in the past are working on, some of you folks may have heard of the Massive Passive project. So trying to get some passive solar a huge greenhouse or a series of a couple greenhouses on campus and at a few partnering locations, as well as we've successfully created a new intersectional food studies program at Western. So just increasing food studies curriculum because there is a huge community. I'm sure a lot of you folks are involved and or have been reached out to by tons of Western students about getting involved with the local food system here. So that's a little bit about us. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Excellent, Dannah, thank you. And is Paul Planer on the roundtable tonight? And would you like to come tell us about your Locavore initiative, your vision for local food?
Yeah. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
So I'm Paul Planer, for those of you that don't know me, which is 99% of the population in Gunnison. I'm just a local conservation advocate and a self-described locavore. And this is kind of a little bit of a new idea on my part that, I've helped out Susan on her farm, and obviously I grew up a farm kid. And so agriculture, gardening, farming, and all that has been a huge influence in my life, as well as, outdoor activities and natural resources. So I run a small business very briefly, and I basically do habitat restoration projects throughout public and private land. And that kind of led to this whole idea, seeing the connectivity of all these micro ecosystems as we try to rehabilitate and restore habitat, kind of brings in that connectivity to the whole system. And it got me thinking through some discussions with Katie Dix over at the food pantry about trying to get wild game meat donations active again there. That was only a small part of this food ecosystem, and that we really needed to get a more well-rounded effort there to bring in all the works that's already ongoing in the valley with producers and growers, but kind of really build out the entirety of the true locavore movement, which is to eat local. And so obviously we can build that bubble of local to what is comfortable to us, and taking in, additional climates in the San Luis Valley or, downriver a little farther. But the main emphasis there is basically education on how there is so much local food available with the knowledge, from all the experts that are here on this roundtable, Eric and those kind of guys, that the ability is there to have your own food security. And so another option to bring in is, the natural resources of fish and game too, if it's an uncomfortable subject for some people. But if you just take away the impressions and you just look at it as proteins and sources of omega-3s, it's another important link that people sometimes overlook because of, stereotypes or bad first impressions. And so my goal for this locavore movement is to kind of erase those self-imposed barriers that we put around different groups or different people, and just bring back more a whole centered thought process on what is local food. Back to you, Susan.
Well, that's great. I should say, I didn't jump in right away. Paul, you were doing fine. And I was typing my comment, which said, I'd rather eat fish and game than protein from a Petri dish. So, and I, like you, I look around the Gunnison Valley and I look at the beautiful resources we have in terms of soil and land and water. And if we can conserve it and take care of it, we can feed ourselves. I think most of us are recognizing that the industrialized food system, or at least our industrialized civilization, is going through some sort of collapse. How far that goes, we don't know, but it's up to us to feed ourselves and to build a resilient local food system. Because, as I always say, what if the trucks stop running? And we don't know if they're going to stop running, but we can reach a point where maybe we don't need as many trucks bringing food into the valley, and that we can sustain ourselves. So what I think is really beautiful about it is that Paul had some really interesting ideas and thinking outside the box. And so I thought, I'm sure we all have some ideas thinking outside the box of what we could do to facilitate. So if you think about what Mountain Roots is doing, they're clearly doing a lot. What else do you need? And I'm saying that to everyone in this forum. What else do you need? What can you think of? And how are we going to work together to build our food system? Does anyone want to talk verbally, or should we I'll read the chat.
I guess, Paul, I'd like to know how you want to get people involved with hunting and fishing in Gunnison. And kind of like take it from the Bubba's, and then back to like the actual people who live here. So what are your ideas on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so basically, there's some really bad stereotypes and stigmas to hunting and fishing. And so if you actually look at the trends in participation in hunting and fishing, it has definitely moved away from the good old boy network already. And so the typical older white male is becoming less and less a participant in hunting and fishing. And that's why you're seeing an overall decline in participation in hunting and fishing. And so really our true option in promoting ethical natural resource, active management is what this is. You're actively participating in the management of the species. And so if you're going to take that on, you have to get in on more of the ground floor. You have to do it through education, and you have to be able to bring in younger generations of people. It's a tired old saying, but it's so true in so many things. If you look at farming or ranching, these old traditions die away because younger generations step out of that world and they move on into the next newest flashy thing. And so the thing to remember, I guess, about hunting and fishing is you live in a spot here where you can easily participate in this activity. I don't like to really call it a sport, but you can participate in the activities. And if you bring it back to the food aspect, if I invite you over for dinner and the food is good, right? You have a good positive impression, and you don't really get hung up on the other things. The food becomes kind of the unifier. And in my mind, this whole concept, food becomes the unifying thing that most people can agree upon. And so you can dissolve politics and religions and all those things with good food. Good food builds really strong memories that last. And so when you bring back those kind of ancestral traditions, and this is where gardening, gathering, fishing all comes into play, that's what humans collectively have been doing for generations upon generations. So this new modern farming, this new modern scientific diet-based synthetic foods, this is such a new experiment in the grand total of the human experiment. And so you have to not think of this as a new thing. This is returning to what you and your ancestors have been doing for generations. So you're coming home to the idea of, I can go pick berries, I can collect wild greens, I can fish. The bounds there are tremendous when you look at it as a food source, and start at that level, start at a food source level, because that's what's important to me. When you listen to Katie explain the needs of the food pantry, and I'm sure over at Mountain Roots with you guys doing your free markets too, giving away food, you see that increased demand and the real need for food. Through hunting and fishing, hopefully I'm getting to the answer to your question. It's a really long answer. But I think through hunting and fishing, it's just one more aspect of that same principle of, relying on local foods first. And so you're in this area that provides all these wonderful foods. And it'll just take a little more outreach and a little more education to really expose more people to the benefits of it. And hopefully we can not get hung up on where we disagree on certain things, but just look at what unifies us and what collects us all, across the board. And so what I had mentioned to Susan before was, as a hunter or a fisher person, as a gardener, or as a gatherer, if you're just gathering wild food, berries and greens we're all connected as under one roof as like a gatherer. We're gathering our food from a source that's natural. And so that builds within you when you're collectively participating in the food source like that, that builds an internal value there that's missing when you go buy a hamburger through a window, or you pick up a weird fruit that you can't pronounce and wonder where it came from in the grocery store. You don't have that connectivity. And so all these things, gardening and gathering and hunting and fishing, returns us back to that connectivity that we're really missing. And so, and you can also add, ranching into there very easily. That is what kind of centers everybody back around that principle of that connectivity, how we're all interconnected, whether we agree on everything or not, we're all connected that way. So hopefully that answered some of your questions.
Definitely. Thank you. I love that.
And Paul, that was a beautiful synopsis. Looking at the chat window, you've really sparked a lot of people. So I'll just open it up, and whoever wants to hop in and discuss. I think Michelle wanted to speak, and maybe Kate. Get away.
Yeah, Paul, I would just really, you're so passionate about your movement, and clearly so many of us are too. And I heard a lot of focus on conflict and stuff, and I would just remove that from your narrative. The way that you talk about connectivity and localism and the measurement of our food and its value and its sustainability by its footprint, by its food miles, is really enough. And there's just so much to build on from that in terms of marketability. I've always wondered, about, I think that it's not legal to sell game and fish locally caught. And I don't know the regulations around that, but I know that they're heavy. And I just always wondered about capitalizing on our local fish, but also doing it in a really, really mindful way, because I also just want to send a caveat that we really cannot all go and pick the wild things willy-nilly. It's a thing to do very artfully and carefully. And there are people who do it very artfully and carefully and teach how to do it very artfully and carefully in our valley. People like Brianna Rose Biles of Rooted Apothecary, who I thought maybe was going to be here. She is a mom. I'm sure she had other things to do. But anyways, this is such a rich topic. And I just don't think that you need to focus on the conflict around it, because you're right, it exists. But if I just may offer that feedback, you sort of entered with there is conflict, and there's also so much beauty and so much to get that, yeah, in the future talking about it, you can really focus on that.
I want to say that Brianna is going to be speaking tomorrow on foraging for wild plants and for food medicine. So if any of you guys are interested in that, I would jump in tomorrow.
This is Peggy. I think it's a super interesting topic. And one thing that came to mind to me is I fly fish. And of course, you know, I love to fly fish. I would do it as much as I could. But it's a lot of catch and release, which is fine. And I think the notion of having some sort of cause or event where it's fishing for locals, I just think people would really embrace that here. You know, people are passionate about their fly fishing anyway. They know that it contributes to a local food insecurity issue. I think that would be really powerful. So Paul, I really applaud you. I think you've really hit on something big here.
No, and it's a good point, Peggy, and it's actually one that Katie and I have had this discussion already. And I've actually talked with Brandon Diamond, who's our district manager at Parks and Wildlife. And so, you know, as someone who actively fishes, they have a lake trout derby. They call it that because they have to manage the lake trout in order to maintain kokanee numbers.
Yeah.
What I suggested to Brandon was, you know, they collect the fish heads for their research, and then they also have this little raffle thing through the fish heads. You catch the right fish, you get whatever.
Yeah.
And what I really wanted to bring to Brandon's attention is they caught like 4,100 fish the last fish derby. Imagine half of those fish going through the local food distribution system through Katie, because that's the legal channel to do it properly.
Yeah.
And so if we donate that food through Katie and the food pantry, imagine the poundage of fish in just one single fish derby on one species at one small window in the season.
Yeah.
It's a humongous amount of you know, available resource for those that would have no other means to get the resource.
Yeah, I'd love to be involved in something like that. I mean, there's nothing better than fresh trout. So yeah.
Well, while you all were talking, you probably didn't see everything going on in the chat because you've, again, really sparked it. I think there's a discussion of a community fish fry and maybe teaching people how to cook the fish, and we could all get together and eat the fish. And I would like to take the heads and guts and make fish hydrosalate, which is a fermented fish product that's excellent for backyard gardeners. We need to do this. So we just got to do it.
And Dannah, what you put in the chat, Gabby's a really good friend of mine. She's still, she works for Hunt to Eat. So that's an organization you guys should definitely check out. They try to get people that might not normally be in hunting circles to be in hunting circles. So maybe like women, things like that. And then also there is an organization called Open Arms of the Western Slope, and they do gun safety and gun training for women or people that just maybe are not normally in those circles. So that's also something to check out. That's run by Kate Clark. So you can also check that out.
Alexis, could you put the names of those organizations in the chat for folks?
what other, in addition to Paul's outstanding idea of hunt, gather, fish, grow in the locavore movement, other people have tuned in with their vision for local food. Are there other topics that you're burning to talk about that we can all collaborate on? Chime in, anyone.
If I can chime in, what I have really found about local food is that there are a few mental barriers that come through, and some of them are true and some of them are not. But I think accessibility to cooking skills and understanding what is local at certain times of the year. You know, I'm sure most people on this call understand this concept, but the cost or the concept of endless abundance, that all types of food are available all throughout the year. So what does it look like to set up resources, easy to find resources for folks interested in what grows when and how they can still have a healthy, well-rounded diet by eating seasonally and locally. And shameless plug, there's a woman, Dannah Sue from Crested Butte Personal Chefs, who will be speaking a little bit about that. But if anybody has any ideas, I'd love to spark a conversation about that.
Well, I'd say, Dannah, along those lines, since I sell at the Gunnison Farmers Market and the Crested Butte South Market, it is amazing when people come up and maybe they want rhubarb in August. And in Gunnison, our rhubarb is ready in June and into July. And that's just one example. And then we've had people move to the valley and ask why we're not growing peaches. Well, I'm not sure how much climate change we need to have before we can grow peaches, but I don't want to ever grow peaches here. We need to teach people what is in season and what we can grow here. And it comes one-on-one, like at the farmer's market. People kind of figure it out, but truly educating people about eating in season is really important. And you know, maybe the Guild needs to add a section to our webpage. Maybe Mountain Roots can help with that education as well. Maybe we all just talk to our neighbors. Yeah, maybe you can do it. You did such a good job organizing this conference.
I think one thing with that is if you're a CSA member or you're going to the farmer's market, you sort of naturally eat seasonally. But the issue is cooking. A lot of our CSA members didn't know like what to do with certain things, and it might sit in their fridge for a couple of weeks. I actually still have squash sitting on my counter that's been sitting there for a couple of months because like even I as a farmer don't really know what to do with that squash, and so it's just sort of sitting up there. So I do think that like figuring out how we can teach people to cook these things like on a regular basis would be pretty important. Even I need it. Yeah.
Is this where we put in a plug for the local foods cookbook? Right now, you know, the Guild is compiling this cookbook. Many of the folks who registered realized, oh, I get a free digital cookbook. But we envision that is going to be a working document that continues to grow because listen, right now we only have 18 recipes in it. So I bet most of the people on this call think about eating locally and what would you do if I handed you a winter squash? What would you cook if I gave you some collards that are in my greenhouse right now? What do you love to do with spinach? How do you cook turnips? I would love it if everyone who attends the conference would submit a recipe because that's part of how we're going to share our knowledge too. And maybe Paul has a historical recipe with wild game that's been in his family for 3 generations. Those are the kinds of things that we could preserve. That knowledge and that information.
If I could chime in, one of our longer term initiatives is, as I mentioned, connecting our food efforts with the food hubs and other distribution locations, farm runners, for example, out of Hotchkiss, the San Luis Valley Local Foods Coalition down in Alamosa. And we do have a small amount of funding to launch a marketing campaign that we have tentatively titled "Why Local, How Local?" ? And it's the why and the how of local. And so I think what we could collaborate on and what we could use your input on is, what is the message that we're sharing? I think Alexis made a good point that if we're going to our CSA customers in the farmers markets, we're going to people who at least already sort of know that they should be and are more likely to maybe seek out the information. But I think that the marketing campaign and educational messaging for the general public is to kind of shift a mindset, which is going to be pretty hard. So helping us as we design that campaign to understand what is our message, who needs to hear the message. I think we all agree we want to educate people, but what do we tell them and how do we get that message out? I would love to have some input on that when we reach that point in our program design.
Thanks, Holly. The floor is open if anyone is thinking of anything, thinking outside the box about local food. What are your needs? What do you need to know? How can we collaborate?
I think I see Katie waving her hand. Katie, would you like to share? I can unmute you if you'd like. There you go. You got it.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Kate has mentioned in the chat that she's hoping that she's with a group who might like to donate an elk when they come across one that wants to be fed to the neighbors. And I'd like to bring in what Paul is working on. He's creating a certificate, a game meat donation certificate, where when people have a wild game that they want to donate to the pantry, the only requirement that we have is that it has to be processed in a USDA facility. And sometimes people can donate the processing, and sometimes that's a little hard. So we have a game fund, a wild game processing fund at the pantry, and we can help meet the cost of the processing. And I hope Paul's going to come back to this and talk and tell what he's doing, because it's fantastic. And then I would like to say to everyone, if you find yourself in that position where you can offer a piece of wild game, to get in touch with us, and let's do it not only right, but affordably for the donor.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for sharing. It's always really great to hear how you can get involved with the food pantry. There's so many ways, even if it doesn't have to do with local food. So. I see Gail maybe waving. Gail, would you like to share?
Yeah, I'd love to share a little bit. So I've been tuning in kind of without my video on. And I love the conversation. It's been nice to hear from everybody. So I'm like what I guess I would fit into the category of backyard gardener. But I have gardened for years, and my husband and I are getting quite serious about it. And I don't know, sometimes we throw out the word homestead, and, you know, we do that in like are we actually there yet sort of a way. But we dream about that. And for me, like one need in the Valley, or one thing that I would love to see in the Valley, is I feel like there's this division. There's like the professionals and the farms and like the guild, and then there's hobby gardeners. And I often find myself feeling like I feel like I'm a little bit more than a hobby gardener. Like we're very serious about what we're doing. We're trying to eat our own food as much as possible. We're growing enough. Like last year we ate all the way from May 1st till December 1st, our own food from our own garden. And we've been eating stuff all winter that we've been canning, and, you know, winter squash that we've grown. So we're trying to be serious, and we're trying to have these goals, but I don't often feel like I have a community to share those, you know, that struggle with and ask questions to. And it's kind of like there's classes out there for like how to garden. And I'm like, okay, I know how to, you know, I know the basics. I don't need a basics class. I don't need gardening 101. I'd love to like have a community where we get together and visit each other's gardens and dig into like the more advanced level stuff. And what are people struggling with and what are they not struggling with? And, you know, how are you getting your onions to be so successful and not go mushy halfway through the winter? And, you know, how did you turn your basil into a whole hedge and just instead of having just these little basil plants, or, you know, those kind of questions. So for me, like, I would love that direction somehow in our valley, to get like that middle group of people together and form a club or a monthly meeting or some kind of thing. And maybe it's already out there and I just don't know about it. I don't know. So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents, I guess, for tonight.
Gail, that is wonderful. I commend you on your success in homesteading and backyard gardening. And there are a lot of outstanding gardeners like yourself that are feeding themselves almost year round. Dave Schieffer, Robert Johnson, Sherry Redden on her farm has greenhouses. And so there are a lot of folks like you. We might be able to include that as part of the Gunnison Valley Producers Guild so that you didn't have to start a new organization. And there are 2 Facebook sites that you might be aware of if you're on Facebook. One is Gunny Valley Gardeners, and the other is the Gunnison Valley Gardening Network. So those are the 2 that I know of. And it's not quite like people are getting together in person. So I think it's a small resource. I think we do need to step it up a bit and have more connectivity. So, and Rachel, I just saw your comment, Rachel. I didn't know that Dave Schieffer had a club. I didn't realize that. Well, good. Let's I'll call him. We'll make him president of this new club.
I think we could do the Producers Guild too, as just being more of that. Sounds like we could learn from Gail. So I don't think you have to be a farmer to attend, and Robert Johnson attends, and yeah, the more the better. I say maybe come to the Producers Guild.
Yeah. And we could have some subsets. We could have some subgroups of people with various interests.
Cool. I love that, you guys. Thanks. Yeah, I think it would be really fun to expand the local food movement by encouraging people to see backyard gardening as a way to actually be sustainable. But yeah, I mean, you know, Paul and Paul Duba and Karen Emerso, they grow like so much of their own food, and Jen Schieffer. And I'm like in contact with those guys, but it still is kind of loose, you know. It'd be so nice to pull it together. Yeah.
On that note, Gail, there are a lot of people who are exploring the backyard chicken concept and realizing that they can raise chickens for eggs and or meat pretty easily, and it's a nice source of protein. And so I think, like the upscale backyard gardener, those people who are, you know, dabbling in backyard chicken production might be folks we could invite to join the Producers Guild too, at this sort of co-producer. You know, I'm not a pro, but and I'm not selling at the commercial scale, but what I'm trying to do is maximize my production of all kinds of things. I just think there's a tie there.
Yeah, very much so. And a lot of people who are serious about backyard gardening have chickens. You know, it kind of goes around here. We have chickens and we use their compost, and it all ties together so naturally. So yeah, it kind of works really well together.
Rachel, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to explain that Dave, I don't even remember how he organized it, but I don't know, once a week for several weeks in a row, a few summers back, we met in his garden and asked questions, and he showed us stuff. And like I said, I really don't remember how it was organized, but I feel like Gail, this is so awesome, because I feel like it is just taking initiative and speaking up like you did. So yeah, let's get something going. I built a greenhouse last fall and I have no idea how to use it. I would love some support. So I'm tuning in for that kind of thing. Thank you.
My husband and I have been like obsessively watching this YouTube channel of some folks homesteading up in Alaska, and it's like our outlet. You know, we're like, oh, what are the Alaskans doing? Oh, they're planting their such and such. And I feel like we could do something local, you know, like a local group that, okay, what are you planting? What are you doing? What are you starting? how's your greenhouse going? Stuff like that.
If I can chime in one more time, if nobody else wants to jump in, I don't want to take up space for folks who haven't spoken yet. Cool. Just really quickly, I'd like to bring attention to maybe the folks who don't want to garden, but also want to support local food. And also those who agree with hunting locally, but can't stand the thought of killing an animal because it's so hard. I'll personally just go out there and say, I support local hunting. I think it's amazing. I think it's so important to know where your meat comes from. But the thought of killing something just like hurts me. And so how do we get folks like that? How do we get folks that, you know, maybe just a soft introduction to hunting? Maybe there's some sort of way that like we can combine those very traditional hunters, but also with those folks who just like animals are people too kind of people. Like, you know, I think if we have that divide, like we were talking about a little bit in the beginning of like, there's the hunters and then there's the non-hunters, but how do we make that so it's not so split? If anybody has any thoughts on that.
Oh, I can chime in a little. I don't want to take up too much space either. I want to allow some new ideas out there, but yeah, that's kind of bringing it back to this whole connectivity thing. You know, I really think that if people start to realize that it's a basic food connection that we all share, it kind of eliminates those self-imposed barriers that we like to put up between groups, no matter across society. You know, we do it all the time. And so if we bring it right back to the basics of just about good, wholesome local food, and however we introduce that to people through backyard barbecue events, or, you know, like when you have harvest time and you maybe do like the old time traditional harvest get-togethers where everyone kind of pitched in and helped everybody harvest their particular crop that time, and you provide that food then. There's where those, touching on another point, those people that are really good at cooking these you know, special techniques for these foods that really make them shine, if we could get those folks there to kind of just cook and talk and demonstrate at the same time, like people will pick up on that and realize we're all just one community trying to live and to eat and exist. And so I think the main thing for everyone is to not, you know, try to look for division, but try to figure out what brings us together. And for me, I think this group has it already in just wholesome local food. We've got enough right there to keep everyone interested and to keep everyone engaged, just on one topic, you know. And however you spread that topic out across the community, it travels. It has its own resonance.
Well, I'll say that I expected the local kitchen, the community kitchen concept to come up, and in part, I'm relieved that it hasn't. But okay, then I'm going to bring it up. What always occurs to me is my vision for local food is I would love to be able to just grow as much cabbage as I could, and then we could all get together and turn it into sauerkraut and eat it all winter long. And maybe we work on community storage of our squash. And then maybe we could have, once we're past COVID, have more potlucks during the winter. We have a lot of fall harvest potlucks and things like that. But I think getting together and figuring out how to preserve the food and cook the food is going to go a long way. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's easier to go to the grocery store and buy some crap in a bag. It is work to grow local food and cook local food and preserve local food. But that's where I think the quilting bee idea comes in. If we could do it together, we could distribute some of that work and we could all learn a lot and keep these skills as well. But I don't know, I'm just a farmer. I don't know what that looks like. Folks, we've got 4 more minutes. According to my clock, does anyone else have something in their vision for local food that they really want to share? It feels like we've made good contacts, but what have we left out?
Hey everyone, can you see me? No.
Kimberly, we can see and hear you.
Oh, great. Can you hear me and see me? Hi, I just want to introduce myself. I'm really enjoying the conversation. I love the focus on locality. I love the focus on food sustainability. You know, I've been a farmer for a little bit of time in many different avenues as such, but it's just so refreshing to hear these voices with many different solutions on how we can all coalesce together to really create a sustainable food system. I think this past year really hit home for me in regards to what my skill set is and what I can provide directly for my community. I also have a background in healthcare, but I also grow food in extreme environments. And I've just realized that, you know, talking with you all and listening to you all and what you have to provide for this sort of solution, it's just rather inspiring and refreshing. And I just wanted to say that and say hello. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you. That was really nice.
Yeah. Does anyone else have something burning that they would like to share in the next 3 minutes? And also I'll suggest if you're about to go to bed and it pops into your head, or if you think of it in the morning, feel free to email me, Sue Wyman, sue.wyman@GunnisonGardens.com, or Dannah Lehman, whose email you probably saw as you registered, or contact Alexis at Iola Valley Farms. And our emails, Alexis and mine, were on that PowerPoint that scrolled through at the beginning. You'll see it again for the rest of the conference. So unless someone else has something really urgent, just thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Paul, especially for sharing your vision. Thanks, Holly and Katie, for everything that you're doing. And I feel inspired. I'm just inspired by everyone on this call. We got this. So remember, tomorrow night we have 2 more sessions, and then the conference is also Saturday from 10 to 2. Anything else? Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for showing up, and the chat room will be open for a little while. And again, email us and let's all connect.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Is our mic on?
Hmm?
Is our mic on?
Mic on?
Is our microphone on?
Yeah.
Hey, is Paul still on here? Yeah, I see. I just stayed on because something Katie said stuck with me about Katie said the only restriction they have into accepting a hunter's donation and then redistributing it is that it has to be processed at a USDA facility. And that's come up even, you know, from Parker Pastures and Calder Farm, you know, the fact that we have to have USDA processing to make anything legal. So I wonder if we need to start there. How do we bring USDA processing and make it more accessible, not just to hunters, but to all of our producers, if that's the barrier? And then I wanted to ask, like, is that really the barrier, or is there a way around that barrier? Is there any sort of alternative that would work? You know, like, I'm okay with trying to find a way around it if we can, if that truly is the barrier, but I just wanted to find out more about that particular restriction and test whether that's a limiting belief or an actual barrier. And we don't need to discuss it now, but I think it should be like earmarked for something we look into more later. It's a policy issue, but it's a thing.
Holly, I agree entirely. If I could jump in, and I think we need to look at Wyoming, which has some incredible food sovereignty laws. And
Mhm.
the same thing in terms of being able to raise and process rabbits and sell them. We can't do that,
Yeah,
but other states can. And I think that this may be a place where we, I don't know, maybe we get a Western student to lead the rally to petition our legislators to get some laws changed. If
Right.
we explore and find that it's illegal, that doesn't mean no, it just means not yet. And we're
Right.
the people. So I think we just push back on all of that. Food sovereignty.
that's true. I'm aware of some food sovereignty movements in Maine that have been pretty successful, where they've just said, you know, we make a demarcation of our boundary, and within these boundaries, we have different rules. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Right.
Weren't there plans to be a processing plant down by the airport?
I don't know. Yeah, Brian Hess is doing that. He's just barely poured the foundation, but I don't know that he's going to be fully USDA certified right away. He might start out being more like Guerreri, the meat processing at the base of Craner Hill. And it can take a while to get that USDA certification. But yes, he is working toward that. It's a ways out. Yep. Hi, Heidi.